I was staying at a cabin in Canada. It's a family-owned lodge. Nothing too big or fancy, just something my grandparents built and kept up so that every now and again someone in the family could enjoy a getaway there. This was just after the new year. I planned to stay 3 nights at the cabin. It was out in the middle of nowhere on some off-the-grid property that I had to get to by snowmobile, which was normal around this time of year. When I got there, I fired up the wood heater and set up my stuff in the bedroom. Within just 30 minutes, I started to feel the sense of relief that I was hoping for. Time felt to move slower out here, and there was nothing to crowd my mind with. I could just lay back and enjoy the peace and quiet. The rest of that day and night was nice. I got up in the morning at sunrise, making breakfast on top of the wood stove. Then I bundled up to head outside and grabbed more wood. When I opened the front door, I was taken aback. There were footprints in the snow coming right up to the cabin. I immediately stepped outside and looked around. Then I followed them for a while. They led into the woods with no signs of going toward the road, which was several miles away. How could they be way out here and not have taken a snowmobile? And why were they out here to begin with? I was really confused, especially with them having to have come up to the cabin during the middle of the night. Otherwise, I would have heard them in the morning. I got wood from the shed and brought it inside. I debated leaving, but I figured if they came by and didn't do anything, then it must have been an accident. Not to mention how much of a hassle it was to get to and from the cabin. It just would have made this trip a huge waste to leave. Now I sat by the fire and just kept a lookout for the next couple of hours. I didn't see anything. As the sun got higher and the temperature got warmer, I threw my jacket back on and wanted to go for a walk in the woods. To pass the time, I decided I might as well take the opportunity to see if the footprints led anywhere. Maybe I'd find another cabin or something, which would put my mind at ease. I followed them into the woods. I walked for probably 20 minutes, not passing any signs of anything. It was just one continuous trail of prints in the snow going through the woods until I suddenly heard something ahead of me. I whipped my head up and looked ahead. It was suddenly quiet and everything was still, just endless trees and snow. I knew what I heard was the crunch of a footstep. There was no mistaking it. I felt goosebumps all over my body as I knew someone was out there in front of me, having to be hiding behind one of the trees. They probably just noticed me and quickly hid maybe 10 or 15 feet from where I was. "Hello? Is someone out there?" There was no response, not even the slightest sound. As the tension grew, I felt like I had to do something. I decided to turn around and run back to the cabin. I packed everything as quickly as I could, locked up the cabin, and took the snowmobile back to the road. I don't know what happened at that cabin or what was going to happen, but I have no doubt that the person in the woods was the same person who came by in the middle of the night. Them being on the way back to my cabin only shows that it was no accident. I haven't been back to the cabin after that. Every year around the end of February, my good friend Justin and I take a camping trip to the same place. We both did a lot of backpacking and camping, but there was always something different and nice about camping in a snowy forest. With the right gear, it wasn't all that unsafe either. This year we got there and set up our tents, built a campfire, and enjoyed a couple of drinks around the flames. It wasn't long after we got there that we suddenly heard something horrifying. It was a dark scream in the distance, echoing across the landscape. It only lasted a few seconds, then it went quiet again. Both of us jumped up from our chairs, startled by it. It sounded too far for us to even have a chance at seeing who it was, but we looked in that direction anyway. Justin seemed to think it had to be an animal making an eerily human sound because there was no way someone else was out here. I was pretty sure it had to be a person, but either way, we didn't really know what to do other than wait and see if we heard it again. A while passed and nothing else came. The sun started to set and the temperature started dropping. We grabbed more wood for the fire and made food. Then, out of nowhere, that scream sounded again. It was closer, maybe only 200 feet away from where our camp was. Justin and I looked at each other, both thinking we should probably check it out before the sun fully set. I grabbed my knife just in case, and we both bundled up and headed into the woods. We walked cautiously, unsure what exactly we were approaching. We had gotten maybe 150 feet out when we heard it one more time from almost right next to us. I stopped and stared in that direction, but there was nothing there. I glanced at Justin, and he seemed as worried as I was. We stood still for nearly 5 minutes before Justin slowly stepped forward again. He passed a few trees and suddenly stopped. I could sense the fear in his body language. I stepped up next to him and almost threw up. There was a deer carcass lying in the snow, clearly put down recently. Then I felt Justin tap my shoulder. I lifted my gaze, and standing across the forest was a person. He was just standing there, wearing hardly any winter clothing. He was watching us, almost like he was observing us. Justin tapped my shoulder harder, and I understood. Both of us turned and hurried back to our camp. We didn't speak as we packed in a rush and got out of the area. I don't think there's an explanation for what we saw or who that was, or even if that was the person we heard screaming. After that, we stopped going to that camping spot and chose a different area, hoping to never come across something like that again. It was the day before Christmas Eve. I had hopped in my car to do a few DoorDash deliveries, hoping the holiday season would bring in better tips. It was around 11 p.m. when I got this order. It was a normal one, just a bag of food to drop off at a house. Most of my previous orders were grocery deliveries, probably because stores were closing for the next 2 days. The address on this one was farther than I'd usually drive, but with not many orders coming through, I took it anyway. It was lightly snowing and the roads were quiet, making the drive peaceful. The house wasn't in an average neighborhood. What I thought was the entrance turned out to be a thin path through the trees, with a small cabin-like home at the end. I pulled in and parked, grabbed the food, and walked up to the door. I knocked a few times. Inside, I could hear chatter, like a group of people laughing and talking over each other. It sounded like too many people for such a small cabin. There was something strange about it. Something felt off. When the door opened, a man stood in front of me, and the contrast to what I expected caught me off guard. The inside of the house was motionless. No one was moving around, and most of the lights were off. Yet the sound of a huge holiday party was coming from a small room at the end of the hallway. The man smiled and said, "Why don't you bring the food inside? They'll be happy to see you." That was an odd thing to say. I started stuttering, trying to say no and make an excuse, but the man interrupted. "They just want to thank you for working during the holidays. You'll be glad you stopped by." As he said these creepy things, the chatter continued, until it suddenly stopped. Just like that, the cabin went quiet. It was like a recording had been shut off. The man glanced back, clearly not expecting that, and before he could react, I dropped the bag on the porch and ran to my car. I drove away immediately. I stopped doing deliveries that night and stayed home for the rest of the holidays. I don't know what actually happened at that cabin, but how disturbingly strange everything felt, and what could have happened, still freaks me out. It was the day after Christmas, and I worked at a small family-owned grocery store as an overnight stalker. I'm not even sure why I was scheduled that night because we were closed for Christmas, and it was probably slow during the day, so there wasn't much for me to do as far as stalking. I spent the first hour filling what little needed to be stocked on the shelves. After that, I mostly just wandered around the store. As I was walking past the front, I noticed a person outside, unusually close to the building for that time of night. He looked like he was just walking around, but when he noticed me looking at him, instead of leaving, he came closer to the window. He didn't say anything or try knocking. He just stared at me. I felt extremely uneasy and wasn't sure what to do. After a few seconds of him not looking away, I turned and walked from the window, trying to play it off like I wasn't bothered. It was very strange. No normal person acts like that. I waited a few minutes before returning to the front to look out the window again. He was gone. I sighed in relief and continued walking around the store to pass the time, weaving through the aisles and fixing shelves. About 10 minutes later, when I rounded the corner at the end of an aisle, I immediately stopped. Several large boxes had fallen off the shelves and were scattered across the floor. They weren't small enough to have tipped over on their own. Someone had to have knocked them down. As I was trying to process this, I heard something from further down the aisle. It was a soft, deep, eerie laugh, like a man quietly laughing just around the corner. It sounded unnatural, like a grown adult giggling like a child. Part of me considered confronting him, but when I remembered the man by the window, I realized he was fairly big and could have been hiding something in his jacket. I ran to the front, rushed out the doors, got in my car, and called the police. They arrived about 10 minutes later, but the man inside the store was gone. Later, we reviewed the security footage and saw that he had entered through a side door. As he hid behind the aisle laughing at me, he was holding a knife, a small switchblade. The cops thought he wasn't sober, and I don't disagree, but I don't think that changes anything. I could have died that night if things had gone differently. It was New Year's Eve. I was never a big party person, but on nights like that, I usually got peer pressured into going out. That year, a friend of mine was hosting a party at his place. He was known as the rich friend, because he had a big house and a lot of land. My buddy Travis picked me up in the evening, and when we arrived, there were around 20 or 30 people there. Nothing too crazy, but enough for me to drink more than I should have. We played drinking games, watched the ball drop, and overall had a good time. Around 3 in the morning, I was ready to leave and found Travis passed out on a bed upstairs. Figuring no one there was sober enough to drive, I went outside and ordered an Uber. It said the driver was 10 minutes away, so I sat on the curb at the end of the driveway and waited. The house wasn't near any major roads. It was quiet and isolated, which felt relaxing after the night I'd had. After what felt like only a few minutes, a car pulled up. "Uber," the driver called out. I jumped up and got in, startled by how I'd lost track of time. I realized I was more drunk than I thought. The driver looked to be in his 50s, with short dark hair and a thick beard. "Big party tonight?" he asked. I responded casually, not really in the mood for conversation. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and something about the look made me uncomfortable. At the time, I thought I was overthinking it. I leaned back and closed my eyes, trying to rest, but a minute later my phone buzzed. I opened my eyes and immediately made eye contact with the driver in the mirror. He was already watching me. I checked my phone, and my stomach dropped. The Uber app said my driver had just arrived at the pickup location and was asking where I was. I looked back up, and the man's eyes were still locked on me. I put my phone away and pretended nothing was wrong, though inside I was panicking. About 30 seconds later, the car slowed to a stop at a red light. The moment it stopped, I opened the door and jumped out. As I was getting out, he started driving, causing me to fall onto the pavement. I scrambled up and sprinted away as he drove off. I don't know who that man was, but it seemed like he was picking up drunk people waiting for Ubers on New Year's night. There were so many warning signs I missed, like the fact that we weren't even driving toward my home. I was too out of it to think clearly. I never should have gotten into the car without checking my phone. Where he might have taken me, or what could have happened, still terrifies me. It was the first weekend of February. I was home, enjoying a few days off from work. Everything felt normal until sometime in the afternoon when I thought I heard a noise from upstairs. It was a single thud, not very loud, but unusual enough that I went to investigate. I didn't find anything and didn't think much of it afterward. Hours later, as I was winding down for the night on the couch, I heard another thud, almost identical to the first. Again, I found nothing. I even checked the spare bedroom, which was completely empty. I figured it was the house settling or maybe an animal on the roof and went to bed. The next morning, I went downstairs to make coffee and breakfast. That's when I noticed something was off. As I moved around the kitchen, it felt like things had been moved. The cereal and chips in the pantry didn't look like they were where I'd left them. Obviously, I hadn't purposely memorized the order they were in, so I couldn't confirm it, but I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right. I didn't know how that could even be possible. I tried to pay more attention to things for the rest of the morning, but eventually I forgot about it. I kept thinking about how impossible it would have been, so I convinced myself I had to be mistaken. The rest of the day passed normally as I watched TV and did some chores downstairs. Just after sunset, I heard that same sound again. I stood up to check it like I had before, but as I approached the stairs, I heard a click. It was very quiet, but it was definitely a click of some kind. I went to the top of the stairs and listened for a moment, then checked my bedroom and found nothing. After that, I went to the spare bedroom, figuring I might as well check there again. I grabbed the handle and turned it, but it stopped halfway. It was locked from the other side. Blood rushed from my face and my heart pounded with sudden panic. I stumbled back a few steps, my legs feeling weak, but I forced myself to steady when I heard movement behind the door, someone approaching it from the other side. I ran down the stairs as I heard another click, followed by the door creaking open. I bolted out the front door and ran to the end of the street to call 911. When police searched the house, they found no one, but in the spare bedroom closet there were grocery bags and a blanket. Someone had been trying to live there for at least 2 days, maybe even longer, without me knowing. They were likely coming out at night while I slept to eat, drink, and move around the house. Just thinking about it sends chills through me. Thankfully, they seem to have left for good after that night. What they might have done if I'd found them is something I never want to know. I was staying inside for the night. It was bitterly cold outside, with a heavy snowstorm moving through town. I had the TV playing a comfort show and was half asleep on the couch when I heard footsteps approaching my front door. The boots were loud enough to wake me. I stared at the door, but there was no knock. They stood there for a few seconds, then took a couple more steps before everything went quiet. It sounded like they stepped off the porch and into the snow. Confused, I got up and looked out the window. The storm was worse than I'd thought, almost complete whiteout, making it hard to see more than a few feet. Barely visible, I could make out shoe prints leading away from the porch. Why would someone step off the porch like that in this weather? I checked the side and back windows for more footprints but didn't see anything else. I went back to the couch and lay down. It felt strange, but I didn't want to overreact. An hour passed without anything happening, and the rumble of the storm and the low TV volume slowly lulled me back to sleep. When I woke up, it was still dark. The TV's timeout screen showed it was 3 a.m. The storm was still raging, but now it sounded much louder, too loud. As I fully woke up, I realized the sound wasn't muffled by the windows. I jumped up and turned on the light, seeing water spots across the floor leading to the front door. The front door was wide open. Snow was pouring inside, and wet boot prints trailed through the hallway. I could barely make out similar prints leaving the house. I grabbed my phone, locked myself in the bathroom, and called for help. Whoever had broken in was already gone. It seemed like they had come inside looking for something specific and left when they couldn't find it. While they were in my home, they either didn't notice me on the couch or silently crept past me, searching the house without waking me. Even thinking about it terrifies me. I haven't had a good night's sleep since, waking up constantly at every small creak or noise. It was just before Christmas. School was out, but my parents still worked during the day. I was an only child, which meant I had the house to myself while they were gone. This was a normal weekday, and my parents left for work in the morning. I immediately turned on my PC in my bedroom and started gaming. Strangely, only 15 or 20 minutes after they left, there was a knock at the front door. Being young and not used to answering the door alone, I ignored it. I stayed quiet, hoping whoever it was would think no one was home and leave. There were no more knocks, so I continued with my day. I ended up gaming for hours before finally going downstairs to make some cereal. As I headed back upstairs, I noticed the front door was unlocked. That felt wrong. My parents always locked it and usually left through the garage. I locked the door and went back to my room, uneasy but unsure why. After eating, I went right back to gaming. A few minutes into a new match, I felt my desk shake. I didn't hear anything, but I had my headset on. It felt like a vibration, something I'd normally feel if someone closed a door. I took off my headset and listened. Nothing. I opened my bedroom door and looked down the hallway toward the stairs. It was quiet. I told myself it might have been the heater, but the unlocked door from earlier still bothered me. I walked to the top of the stairs. As I looked down, I saw a shadow move near the bottom. I froze. Just a second later, the shadow stopped moving too, like they somehow saw me. My heart was pounding. I stood completely motionless for what felt like an entire minute. Then the shadow moved again. I faintly heard footsteps heading toward the back of the house, followed by the quiet sound of the back door opening and closing. After that, there was only silence. I ran into my parents' bedroom and called 911 using the house phone. Police arrived a few minutes later, but what they found only made everything more disturbing. There were no signs of forced entry, unless the intruder had picked the front door lock. The front door was still locked when police arrived. That meant whoever it was likely entered sometime during the 3 or 4 hours I'd been gaming. I kept thinking back to the knocking I'd heard shortly after my parents left, but I couldn't understand what someone would have been doing inside the house for that long. He was almost definitely inside when I went downstairs to make myself a bowl of cereal. Maybe he was even watching me from another room, hiding somewhere. We never found out what his intentions were, but I've never truly felt safe since that day. I worked at a gas station for 2 years starting in 2015. During the winter of my first year, there was a regular customer who came in often. Since I worked night shifts, I usually recognized anyone who came in more than once. This guy was a trucker who told me his name was Paul. He was a really nice guy, but there was something different about him. He was always smiling. Too much, especially for the middle of the night. Sometimes it actually felt creepy. One night, though, he came in acting differently. He greeted me, but as he walked the aisles, his face looked dull and almost angry. He grabbed an energy drink and came to the counter, and suddenly his expression snapped back to that overly happy smile. I could see dread in his eyes. The smile looked forced, fake and unsettling. He paid, walked out to his truck, and drove off. I'd nearly forgotten about it until the next night when his truck pulled in again. It was cold and snowing. When Paul came inside, he had the same dull look, but this time, he didn't smile at all. He grabbed the first drink he saw and came to the counter. As he paid, he asked how busy it was that night and when my shift ended. Before leaving, he asked if I could help him lift something in his truck. Since I'd known him for a while and wanted to be helpful, I agreed. I put on my jacket and followed him outside. The gas station was empty except for his truck parked at the far end of the lot. He opened the passenger door, then walked around and got into the driver's seat. He gestured for me to get in and said it was right up here. I climbed in and sat down. It was a large box truck with a door behind the seats leading to the cargo area. I looked at Paul. That wide, strange smile was back. "It's just right in there," he said. "I'll follow behind you." He pointed at the door. I suddenly felt deeply unsettled. This wasn't what he'd said it was. As I sat there trying to figure out what to do, I noticed a smell. It was strong and disgusting, coming from whatever was behind that door. I looked back at Paul. His face was tense, but he kept smiling, watching me, waiting for me to move. I jumped out of the truck, slammed the door, and hurried back into the station. He didn't follow me. As I rushed inside, I thought I heard him yell in frustration, but the wind carried most of the sound away. He drove off shortly after. I worked there for another year, and Paul never came back, not even once. I don't know what was in that truck or what was really going on with him, but I know I was lucky not to find out. I was taking a road trip across the country to my family's house for Christmas. Driving that far in winter wasn't ideal, but I couldn't find anyone to watch my dog Frankie, so I had to bring him. He's a small dachshund, and I thought flying would scare him, so I decided to drive. The first half of the trip went smoothly, good weather and easy driving. But on the morning of the second leg, I woke up to heavy snowfall. I packed quickly and tried to outrun the storm, but it only got worse. Halfway through, I realized I wouldn't make it by nightfall and decided to find a motel instead. The road was nearly empty, with only the occasional gas station every 50 miles or so. When I finally saw a motel sign, I pulled into the parking lot immediately. The building looked very old, and most of the lights were off. There was one other car parked there, so I assumed it belonged to an employee. I left my car running for Frankie and walked through the blizzard toward the entrance, but the door wouldn't open. I wiped the fog from the window and tried to see inside. It looked dark and deserted. I didn't have much time to think before I heard Frankie barking. I turned around and saw 2 men walking past my car toward me. Something about the way they walked felt wrong. I tried to head back to my car, but they cut me off. "Is the place open?" one of them asked. I told them it looked closed and tried to move past them. They asked if I could help them, saying they were having car trouble and needed gas. It felt like they were desperately trying to keep me talking. I said no and backed away, taking a wide path around them. They kept trying to step in front of me. I hurried back to my car as their footsteps crunched quickly behind me. By the time I got inside and locked the doors, they were already at my window. Frankie was whining, and I didn't blame him. We were alone on a deserted road, and the situation felt terrifying. One of the men kept knocking on my window, still asking for help, but it was obvious they didn't need any. It felt like a trap. Before anything could get worse, I backed up and drove onto the main road. After thinking it over, I called 911 to report the encounter. An officer called me back later and said the men were no longer at the motel, and neither was their car. If that doesn't scream guilty, I don't know what does. Their car clearly worked well enough for them to leave, and they'd driven off right after I did. More than the interaction itself, it's the thought of what they might have been planning that still terrifies me. If anything had happened out there, I probably never would have been found.